Okay, cosmic thought, cosmic memory, cosmic dream. Introduction to Rudolf Steiner. That title is taken from one of my favorite kind of poetic spiritual concepts that Steiner explores in one of his books. I think Man is a Harmony of the Creative World, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Just a quote from Steiner to rev us up. It is often asked why we do not know anything of our experiences before birth and after death. That is the wrong question. Rather, we should ask how we can attain such knowledge. Yeah, I mean, as we'll discuss, Steiner was a visionary since early childhood. He was born in 1861 on the border between Hungary and Croatia. Middle-class background. His father was working for the Austrian Southern Railway. Grew up in Potsdam, in Lower Austria. But he was very unique and different because he had apparently these clairvoyant capacities, even from early childhood. He could kind of see these different worlds. Very soon he began to realize that other people didn't have these abilities. And so he kind of stopped talking about them, but he kept doing his research on his own capacities. But I guess, maybe this is a little bit of a mechanistic or materialist way of looking at it. But, you could say, I mean, on the spiritual level, you could say his third eye was open. Maybe on a more, scientific level, maybe he had, the capacity to produce DMT. I mean, from everything that he describes, and I think part of my access to Steiner, it reminds me so much of the types of visions one has on ayahuasca. These overlapping, interpenetrating realities and dimensions, and some of them beautiful, some of them horrible, and so on. And so somehow he had this kind of unfettered access to these kind of visionary layers, of perception. And he also talked about how when somebody died, like an aunt of his died, and then he was she came and visited him. Nobody knew, she was far away. Nobody knew that she had passed away in his family yet, but she had to get his visitation from her. And this would happen whenever anybody in his orbit passed away. They would visit him. So, he just realized that he was in a different reality than other people. And he realized that it really didn't make any sense for him to speak about it because people just couldn't even understand. He found one old gardener in his town who also possessed this type of clairvoyant knowledge. And I guess what Steiner began to understand is that this was a sort of an atavistic capacity that in earlier phases of human development and history, maybe in indigenous cultures or earlier European cultures, many more people had the ability to have this type of visionary perception. But for whatever reasons, it disappeared. And so he became a doctorate in philosophy. He edited Goethe's science papers, and he saw in Goethe's kind of approach to the natural sciences a sort of corollary to his way of understanding, kind of like a more kind of phenomenological perspective, one that allowed for kind of their the sort of spiritual world to exist. When he was his dissertation was called I think it was the philosophy of freedom or intuitive thinking as a spiritual path, and we'll talk about that book a little bit more later. But essentially, it was a kind of a refutation of Kantian dualism, and he proposed that the separation that Kant makes between the things in themselves and the thoughts we have about things is also just like a thought and actually can't really be validated, and that actually we have to look at thinking as something that exists in the world as a real fact of the world, and we don't necessarily have to start with this idea that there's limits to thinking. But what's, the book is great, and it was kind of the basis. When you read it, you understand, it sort of gives a grounding for how he approached thinking, how he approached, philosophy, how he sort of gave himself license to explore these different concepts. Good. And then he got involved with theosophy for a while. And, I think he waited till he was about 40 to start to speak about his own occult research. So I think he lived to be, what, 65, something like that. So it was really the last 25 years were this incredible explosion where he did, many, many books, hundreds of lectures. What's great is there's actually a huge archive of Steiner's lectures online. You can basically go and read everything and just dive deep into his career. And another aspect of Steiner, well, so then he ended up splitting off from Theosophy and starting his own movement, Anthroposophy. I guess he started some disagreements with the Theosophy movement. And, as he was giving these talks, essentially, people would hear them, then they would kind of approach him, like educators would approach him and say, well, how do you apply all of your visionary ideas to education? And then he would develop that, and that's what became the Waldorf school system. And farmers would say, well, how do you apply your ideas to agriculture? He created biodynamic farming. These, and what's fascinating is that these, movements have endured. I mean, he was also a pioneer in homeopathy. One reason I think that Steiner, has, let's say, more intrinsic validity, or reason at least give him a good listen, compared to other kind of occult figures who are a little bit more questionable, is that he was able to take these ideas, which often sound very crazy and far out, and turn them into, enduringly beneficial institutions, that many people have benefited from. I know, for instance, with Waldorf schools, I mean, just when you learn about how these are based on his, esoteric principles, it's very, very fascinating. So, yeah, for instance, with Waldorf schooling, Steiner had this idea, which we'll also discuss, later in more depth, that, we don't just have one body. I mean, we have the physical body, but we also have other kind of orchestrations that you can give the name bodies to, just for convenience. So from his perspective, we currently have 4 bodies. We have the physical body, the etheric body or the life body, the astral body, and the I or the ego. And these bodies kind of differentiate on a 7-year cycle. So sort of when you're born as a child, they're all kind of like mixed together. And then at 7, the etheric body clearly differentiates from the other bodies. And that's signified by the first set of teeth coming in. And for Steiner, based on his esoteric research, children should not really be reading before the age of 7, before the etheric body gets separated. And so that's why in Waldorf school, they start reading quite late. So it's quite interesting, because a lot of people go to the Waldorf schools, but they don't actually know how his esoteric theories kind of influence that. One reason I felt really, I guess, inspired about Steiner right now is I feel that, and I felt this for a long time, and I hope I'm gathered, I suspect many of you do too, that humanity has kind of reached a kind of cul-de-sac in terms of our ideologies and belief systems. We're basically, the world is split between kind of 2 ideologies or ways of thinking about reality. And on the one hand, you have the scientific materialist worldview, which you could, I think, ultimately categorize as a kind of nihilism, which is essentially the idea that, consciousness is entirely a physical phenomenon rooted in the brain, and material is predominant, and, there couldn't possibly be psychic phenomena, paranormal phenomena, supernatural phenomena. There couldn't possibly be an existence of a soul or a spirit after death. And, I think that, we're seeing that scientific materialism and materialism in general, are not enough to hold, a world together. And really what we're seeing is our contemporary world is in a real deep crisis of meaning and kind of spinning around and spinning towards destruction. I guess from Steiner's perspective, and I would also agree with this, the underlying reason for this is that people are denied access to any kind of legitimate form of higher knowledge, which takes the form of some kind of initiation. When I look at something like QAnon, I was just talking about it with a friend this morning. QAnon has become this wildly popular conspiracy theory that, is pretty extreme in terms of arguing that, sort of the neoliberal elites are, doing satanic rituals with children and so on. But I think where that's coming from is this deep frustration that people really do sense on some level that there is a hidden or occult dimension to human existence and to our world. And they are, trying to figure out some way to understand that. And because it's so refuted and kind of devalued or rejected, they end up only being able to approach that through these very deviant types of belief systems, conspiracy theories, and so on. Steiner, would say, along with other occult thinkers, that there are hidden forces, behind the scenes of human reality and our human world, but they're not necessarily, human forces. There are spiritual forces that are working, in the supersensible realm to influence humanity and move us into different pathways and directions, often for their own benefit. And in fact, our role as humans is to learn about these supersensible and spiritual forces and find the path in between them. So to find the balanced path in between them. So on the one hand, we have the scientific materialist worldview, which basically just leads to nihilism and a non-functional world. And then we have, the various religious faiths, which collapse into dogma and sets of beliefs, indoctrination systems, hierarchical control systems, where you're told what to believe and what to do. And I personally don't think that either of those are really plausible for us going forward. So we need a third way, a different approach to how we think about the nature of the world. So Steiner talked about his work as spiritual science, and his idea was that actually, in a way that the way that we had developed historically over the last centuries, with our focus on the natural sciences, technology, material, rational science, was all necessary. It was part of our evolutionary process. But we actually had to then take the sort of groundedness and stability that we developed in our explorations of the natural world, and now turn it into the domain of the spiritual world. And that's really what he felt he was doing. For myself, as we're in this talk, we're going to look at really Steiner's, world from his, the way he broke everything down. But I see that, part of what could be like a new paradigm would be this, this growing interest in the exploration of consciousness that we're seeing, for instance, in the psychedelic movement, or in, the interest in Eastern mysticism or sound meditations or yoga. The realization there are all these body-mind states, and that actually in different altered consciousness states, we have different capacities. We're able to access different types of knowledge. We're able to even accomplish different tasks and so on. This is an idea that I loved from a book called The Psychedelic Future of the Mind by Tom Roberts, where he talked about, instead of the technological singularity, we could rethink about our future direction towards something that he talked about as like a neurosingularity, which would be basically, kind of like conscious exploration of the vast range of body-mind states, and bringing together, shamanic techniques, modern technologies, ways to explore brainwaves and so on. This is all beginning to happen, but it could be pushed a lot further. And then I would also see, as part of this new paradigm, which we'll talk about a little bit more throughout, is the the integration of Eastern mysticism, the basic concepts that you find in Vedanta or Buddhism or Hinduism, and modern science, quantum physics, which has kind of basically shown that consciousness is very primary, and they've sort of flipped it around where, we see a universe made out of mind stuff, and what we see as physical material is maybe more an expression of this underlying consciousness. Amit Goswami is a very interesting thinker whose ideas, I think, map extremely well onto Rudolf Steiner's. He's a physicist. He was a scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He wrote one book called The Self-Word Universe, another book called Physics of the Soul. And he talked about how, maybe the hard problem of consciousness, which cannot really be solved, maybe the reason for that is we don't need a science of consciousness. We have to realize that we need a science within consciousness. And that was a really interesting repositioning. So the, what used to be seen as like the esoteric or occult worldview we now know is no longer in contradiction with the up-to-date kind of scientific worldview. I mean, quantum physics is telling us that you need an observer to collapse the wave to a particle, and even very recently, there's experiments that suggest it's not even possible to have an objective point of view. And of course, that's still on the quantum level, but the quantum level is a level. I mean, it's it's the foundational level, and what we discovered in quantum mechanics is what makes our computers work, and so on. So it's really important, and that consciousness is somehow the primary underlying reality, not so much the material. Then you have things like string theory, which propose that there are kind of multiple dimensions of space and time. There's a beautiful YouTube video called "The 10 Dimensions of Space-Time Explained," which is definitely worth a few watchings. Yeah, and how that would allow us then maybe to even start to think about, how there could be forms of consciousness or forms of being forms of intelligence that exist in dimensions beyond what we're experiencing. It's like the fifth dimension, let's say. Also very popular and controversial is the simulation hypothesis. Elon Musk is behind it, and so on. The idea that the world we're experiencing, the physical universe, is actually a virtual reality that's running as a program in a supercomputer. And there's definitely many physicists, mainstream physicists, who have now glommed onto this and are taking it very, very seriously. And then you have people like David Bohm, the physicist who talked about how the holographic universe, the theory that the universe functions as like a hologram. So yeah, 20th century physics, just some quotes which sort of show that integration of, kind of mysticism and science. John Archibald Wheeler, may the universe in some sense be brought into being by the participation of those who participate. And Arthur Eddington, the stuff of the world is mind stuff. This mind stuff is not spread out in space and time. These are part of the cyclic scheme ultimately derived from it. Yeah, I mean, this idea of a participatory universe, I think, is very crucial for understanding Steiner and his whole mode of understanding. Kind of one of my favorite sort of commentators on Steiner, I mean, because Steiner exists in this kind of strange, outsider category as like an occultist and this just very unique figure, there aren't that many, let's say, serious intellectuals who have written about him in a way that responds to, the sort of nuance and sophistication of his work. William Irwin Thompson is one who's, I think, done a great job writing about Steiner and occultism in general. So William Irwin Thompson talks about the Steinerian vision, which looks at the human as so completely embedded in the animal, vegetal, and mineral evolution of the solar system that it becomes nonsense to separate a fictive matter from mind and a mere 3 dimensions from 10. All of the seemingly mystical perceptions of Steiner have a biological relevance that fits a new kind of science and a new kind of culture. Yeah, I mean, I think those are really brilliant comments. I mean, yeah, as we'll discuss, I mean, Steiner actually, has kind of, well, I guess anthroposophy kind of suggests this, but he puts the evolution of the human being kind of at the center of the world evolution, let's say. Like, he doesn't believe that we are accidental critters that just happen to develop on the earth. He believes that kind of the evolution of the earth and humanity are very intertwined. And I think I mentioned that Steiner said that I'm not sure if I mentioned this yet, but one of the key things about Steiner is he said that, he understood the mission of his life on earth was to bring the knowledge of reincarnation back to the West. And he understood that not only do human beings reincarnate again and again, but the earth itself also incarnates. And each incarnation of the earth represents a different state of being, of humans, animals, plants. There's like this cosmic evolution journey that we're all taking together. But definitely the evolution of humanity is kind of crucial to its understanding. And we'll revisit that a little bit. The planets are not hunks of stuff out there, but nodes of vibration that resonate in multiple dimensions that unfold themselves into one another in patterns of complex recursiveness, in which Sun, Moon, and Saturn are also modalities of Earth. That's another one of William Owen Thompson's ideas. And yeah, I mean, Steiner talks about these previous and future incarnations of the Earth, and he actually gives them names that at first seems kind of confusing, but he talks about the Sun incarnation being the first incarnation of the Earth, then the Saturn, then the Moon, and now we're on the Earth phase of the incarnation of the Earth. In the future, there'll be a Jupiter phase and a Venus phase, then finally a Vulcan phase. And these are all parts of this kind of, cosmic evolution process that's happening. William Owen Thompson also said, the mythologies of the occult seem like Baroque music. There's an overall similar quality of sound and movement, but upon examination, each piece of music is unique. Vivaldi and Scarlatti are similar and different. And I think that's a really fascinating comment, because it's like if you get into different occult and esoteric perspectives, they're often similar in certain ways and then divergent. It can be very jarring and confusing, because you're trying to sort of get some type of coherence of things that are very subtle. Then you find these inconsistencies. But taking this idea, well, first of all, as I mentioned, the sort of new kind of research from quantum physicists suggesting there's actually no objective reality. So we actually live in these kind of overlapping and interpenetrating subjective realms. These different occult philosophies are different kind of like, almost like orchestrations or poetic efforts to encapsulate these other realities. And they can't be seen as, it's a little bit outside of the literal. I mean, Patrick Harper is another thinker whose work I really adore. He wrote a book, The Philosopher's Secret Fire, History of the Imagination. This is something that he really gets into, the difference between kind of mythological thought and kind of modern, rational thinking, which is very dualistic and thinking something that's true or false, either or. Harper talks about how myths are kind of things that never were yet always are, and they have a different relationship to truth in a strange way. Okay, so here's some of Steiner's essential ideas. We'll be touching on many of these as we go through. As I mentioned, he was a spiritual scientist who was seeking to lay out a path of initiation that was, beneficial and healthy for the modern person. He saw thinking as a spiritual path, he saw that through a process of initiation, we had the capacity to kind of evolve to the, sort of begin to, advance our evolution, these kind of future states of being and consciousness by developing and refining these kind of organs of clairvoyance, organs of supersensible perception. And he believed that there was a evolutionary purpose of the development of scientific materialism that only became clear when the mindset and the tools for thinking and kind of experimenting and so on that we developed through science were then applied to this inner realm of consciousness and the spiritual dimensions. Kind of like theosophy, he was involved with integrating the Western and Eastern paths. He saw Christ and the Buddha, for instance, as both crucial figures in the evolution of human consciousness, the evolution of the earth. And I guess, Eastern thinking tends to really not have a very evolutionary perspective. If you get to like Tibetan Buddhism, there's the wheel of karma, the wheel of dharma. There's like, if you look at the Bardo realms, there are these kind of eternal realms that exist. There isn't really, it's a little complicated. Sometimes they talk about, the bodhisattva who's going to keep coming back till everybody's enlightened. And so I guess there's an idea that there's ultimately some culmination. But a lot of times in Buddhism, it doesn't feel as if there's an idea of progress or development. So in a way, I think what Steiner was doing, following on like Blavatsky and the Theosophists, was melding that some of the core ideas of Eastern mysticism with a Western evolutionary perspective, where you see these developments and these incarnations that are like a spiral moving us into different states of being, states of consciousness and possibility. Steiner saw himself as an esoteric Christian, and he talked a lot about something called the mystery of Golgotha, which was, I guess, what happened when Christ came back from the dead. And I guess when they talked about that being a crucial event in the history of the earth. I know that a lot of people struggle with Christianity, but I find his perspective on it very fascinating. And as I mentioned, Steiner said that one of the missions of his life on earth, which he understood from reading his own Akashic record, was to bring the knowledge of reincarnation back to the West, which we'd lost back in like the 4th or 5th century AD, when the pagan mystery schools were suppressed and Christianity kind of took over. Humans incarnate again and again. The earth itself reincarnates, and this is the 4th incarnation of the earth. And it has there's a telos, there's like a purpose, there's a direction, like things are happening for a reason. Steiner also talks about how there were the spiritual beings that work on us all of the time. And he named some of these. I mean, Ahriman and Lucifer he sort of took, let's say, the concept of the devil and from Christianity. And he talked about how Christianity had created this dualism, between God and the devil, heaven and hell. And that actually that was part of a deviation, let's say, in our capacity to access authentic knowledge about these, spiritual realms. That actually was more like a triad where we had these different forces working on us, and the two of the main ones being the Ahrimanic and the Luciferic. And then he also talked about angelic hierarchies and elemental beings and so on. We'll get into some of this in more depth later. This is just a little intro. So I thought I would back up a little bit and talk about the history of the Western occult and kind of this idea of initiation. Essentially, John Lash wrote a great book, Not in Our Image, about Gnosticism. Lash is a little bit of a controversial figure, but the book is very interesting. And basically, it seems as if Gnosticism was kind of the kind of the pagan mystery school wisdom as it had existed up until like the 4th century AD, when Christians really stamped it out. And if you read the Gnostic Gospels, the perspective you get on Christ is that he was kind of an initiate who was telling his followers to open the door for themselves, so what is, basically. So it was a path of direct knowledge. And with the rise of Christianity in connection with the Holy Roman Empire, you had a shift to an indoctrination culture where the priests became the holders of knowledge. People couldn't even read, the sacred books. They were supposed to be devoted, faithful, and if they got in a line, they would be like chopped to pieces. So this whole idea of initiation as a crucial aspect of self-development was lost in the Western world. And that, has kind of led us to where we are today. Gnostics and Rosicrucians. Gnosticism was the idea they were the holders of the mystery school wisdom until they were stamped out in the 4th century AD. Then there's been occasional attempts to kind of reassert initiatory knowledge in Christianity. And one of the main ones was the Rosicrucian Enlightenment in the Renaissance, where there was an effort by a bunch of intellectuals to bring initiatory knowledge back into Christianity. But this was put down by Catholicism. And a great book on that subject is The Rosicrucian Enlightenment, Francis Yates. Just a figure, in a way, maybe a little bit of a foreshadower of Steiner's Swedenborg, who was also an intellectual who, believed that he had these direct visionary experiences. I haven't gone too deep into Swedenborg. To be honest with you, this is just from Wiki. But according to the Heavenly Doctrine, one of Swedenborg's books, the Lord opened Swedenborg's spiritual eyes, so that from then on he could freely visit heaven and hell to converse with angels, demons, and other spirits. And the last judgment had already occurred the year before, in 1757. So jumping ahead, right around Steiner's time was Madame Blavatsky, who wrote The Secret Doctrine, and definitely was a big influence on Steiner. He was part of Theosophy, although ultimately he left that movement. Madame Blavatsky talked about, receiving transmissions from invisible masters like lamas in Tibet. It was an effort first effort that I think Steiner did a much more refined version of, to integrate Christianity with, Buddhism and Tantrism and so on. The Theosophists in Blavatsky also had this idea of the root races, which, a few people, when I brought up Steiner, have, said, oh, he's a racist, that? And I definitely think it's much more complex than that. Well, first of all, you have to think about knowledge as it develops in its own time. So this is like the late 19th century. And, there is a sense of, Steiner talks about, the Aryan people and, the indigenous people and the Africans as having kind of different dharmas. And there's a little bit of a sense of a hierarchy kind of in that, so I can see why some people would say that there's a racist tinge. And certainly this idea of the root races got picked up by the Nazis and their occult Greek Fool Society and became integrated into their whole program. But in the context of their time, you have to look at people's capacities. And we know, for instance, that Steiner had lots of Jewish friends. I don't think he was at all racist in his normal life, but there is this tinge around some of his ideas, which some people would use as a reason to reject him or avoid him or not explore him at all. But I think that's silly. So there are other trends in 20th century occultism, and I thought this one was interesting to talk about, just because it's a counter. It was a little bit later than Steiner, but it's a counteractive kind of opposite perspective. You have the traditionalists, Julius Evola and René Guénon, who basically argued that it's, we're in the Kali Yuga, we're in this age of destruction, there's no reconstruction coming, there's no liberation, there's no age of Aquarius, there's cycles, but this is the end of a destruction cycle. One of Evola's books was called Men Among the Ruins, that basically all we can do in a situation like this is try to save ourselves by going through initiation and finding, spiritual realization, liberation. They felt that modern civilization is going to destroy itself. It's inevitable, and you might as well just speed up the process. However, Julius Evola, I must admit, I find to be a fascinating and brilliant figure. And at some point, I'll definitely do a talk about him also. And there are definitely some ways where his ideas overlap with Steiner's, although, Steiner is you get such a sweet feeling from Steiner, such a love of humanity and sort of a care and wanting for humanity to, evolve and flourish and so on. And Evola is a little bit more tough. He was, he's actually been picked up by some of the far right. He wrote a book about alchemy, where he talked about how what he saw as alchemy was really a code language for the process of attaining continuity of consciousness between a waking dream and dreamless sleep as the path to spiritual immortality. And actually, as we'll see, Steiner basically talked about the same thing. One of the goals of the initiation would be to achieve continuity of consciousness. So you would have, when you were in dream sleep, when you're in dreamless sleep, you would be conscious and you would be in direct communion or communication with these other realms of spiritual beings. And I think it's true that Steiner himself only slept a few hours a night. I think that he would go into these other states of consciousness in dream. Evola also wrote a book about Tantra. And basically, it's kind of funny because I'm in, basically in the sort of neo-spiritual culture of today, Tantra is all about, lengthening orgasms and pleasure and so on, having better sex. But Evola said that really that's nothing to do with Tantra. The whole point of Tantra is actually to, cauterize our need for sense world experience at the root by fully going into it and exhausting it. So it's not clinging to us anymore. Evola really believed that spiritual kingship is the only authentic form of government. The only thing that works is to have the chief magician running the show, like the pharaoh, who was considered, he was probably like the wizard of his time. Or, in my land where I am, it was definitely, the wizards were also the kings for sure. He wrote a book called Revolt Against the Modern World. He basically felt that total catastrophe cannot be prevented, that we're in a period of dissolution, degradation, and the best thing you can do as an individual is to realize the plight that you're in and try to ride the tiger and go through this alchemical initiatory process. You use the energies of the time of the Kali Yuga to reach spiritual realization, but it has nothing to do with helping humanity in a larger sense. You can really only help those those few of the elite that are left who can take this type of message in. It's quite funny because Ebola has been taken by people like Steve Bannon and Bannon's counterpart in Russia, but I really think they don't understand the thing about what he's actually saying. I don't know, so that's quite interesting. So just a little thing. Gurdjieff is another interesting counterpart or corollary to Steiner. He was also kind of an esoteric Christian. Like Steiner, he established a school, the Fourth Way School. He brought the Enneagram. He also, like Steiner, created like dances and art and so on. And I was just, looking at a few Gurdjieff's ideas, and he's another person I hope to give a talk about at some point. Gurdjieff talked about the law of reciprocal maintenance. I think it's called trogo-auto-egocrats, that all beings are feeding on the beings that are below them and providing food for those that are kind of above them in sort of the hierarchy of being. So we're actually, our thoughts and feelings, like we're eating, we're taking in oxygen from the air, we're drinking water, we're eating plants and animals. And then in our inner furnace, we're creating out of that feelings and thoughts. And our feelings and thoughts are actually then food for these spiritual beings who require them. For Gurdjieff, most people are totally, they're living mechanically. And as long as you're living mechanically, when you die, you become what he talked about as food for the moon. The moon being, for him, an evolving being that requires this type of energy from us. And there are forces that, really try to keep us asleep. But Gurdjieff said that actually even knowledge, like knowledge of higher things, knowledge of higher realms, is a kind of subtle material, and there's only a limited quality. It's not like everybody can have a high level of esoteric knowledge. It's only available for kind of a smaller group, but most people don't even use the amount of that knowledge that could be available for them. So there's a lot still lying around. Gurdjieff also thought that, a soul, having an immortal soul, Christianity says, if you want to have immortality, just have faith in Jesus, but actually that's totally wrong. That actually, Jesus, and I think Steiner and Gurdjieff agree that Christ is actually showing us a model or an archetype or a path, that if we want to develop to our highest potential, we have to follow that archetype in certain respects. So for Gurdjieff, an immortal soul is not something we're just born with. It's something we have to work to acquire while we're alive. And some of the ways we do that, according to him, are a conscious labor and intentional suffering, sort of pushing against the flow and doing things that are difficult, taking on different tasks. So like Steiner, he had a concept of initiation. He felt that you needed to get people moving in this direction. Very fascinating character. Aleister Crowley, I think, is a great illustrator for one of Steiner's points. Crowley created the OTO. He was, kind of a madman, a drug addict. He channeled this character and wrote the Book of the Law. But I think for Steiner, he would be seen as a prime example of somebody suffering from kind of a Luciferic inflation, somebody who'd taken the Luciferic influence far too much and had lost his grounding and had become sort of arrogant. And Steiner really talked about the types of magic that Crowley was doing would be for Steiner like totally unhealthy, imbalanced, like conjuring these different beings and bringing in demons and beings and so on. For Steiner, as we'll discuss, the path of inner development has to be an ethical or moral path. Like you have to be very stable and clear and coherent, or you're going to get, because the more you go up into the spiritual path, the more you get, the worlds that you enter are reflections of your inner being, your inner state. So if you're turbulent and unbalanced and so on, you're going to get those reflections back at you, and they're going to become more and more difficult and destructive. Okay, so now some of Steiner's ideas: spiritual science, initiation. We mentioned intuitive thinking as a spiritual path. Steiner felt that by following a path of development, we could develop these sort of higher cognitive faculties that he called imagination, inspiration, and intuition. We could also develop organs of supersensible perception, supersensible cognition, clairvoyance. And he used the term chakras or lotus flowers. And he talked about how if somebody wasn't, if from a perspective of somebody who had developed the ability to see clairvoyantly, you would kind of see somebody's esoteric makeup. And if they hadn't done this development, you would see the etheric body kind of like unformed and chaotic. The lotus flowers would be kind of like brown and sort of muted. But as you went through the development process, the lotus flowers would be moving harmoniously. There would be spinning. There would be clear differentiation. So from an astral level, you could sort of see, the level of development that people had gone through. And I do think that we kind of like sense that in a strange way. Or it's something. You walk into a room. Let's say, you walk into a room of people who are studying spirituality, and there's a certain ambiance. Like you can feel, somehow like a frequency in the room or an aura around the people. You walk into a room of, crypto, currency traders, and you feel something different. You could sense where people are kind of at with their chakras and so on, or, but we don't really, think about this so intentionally as something to develop as a capacity. And he was really trying to help us do that. As I mentioned, for him, the modern path of initiation was the evolutionary purpose of scientific materialism. And the goal is to really take that cool, rational, scientific method of, objectivity in a sense, and apply it to the spiritual domains to, really be observant, to really be patient, to really be careful, to check your, yourself, your emotions, to go in step by step. This is a beautiful quote from Steiner. The world is filled with the glory of God, but we have to experience the divine in our own souls, before we can find it in our surroundings. So just again pointing out that the inner, where we're at in our inner development is, what we get to experience in terms of the spiritual realms. And yeah, so I guess this idea of the necessity of ethical development for cult study initiation is really crucial. I thought about this a lot in my own life. I feel that I definitely, was making progress in a sense, particularly through ayahuasca and so on. But then I kind of took a deviation and kind of lost, some of what I gained. And, and some of it had to do with, ethical confusion or ethical lapses and so on. And so I totally agree with Steiner that if we want to have a healthy development into the supersensible realms, we have to work on our ethical development, sort of gratitude, humility, devotion, reverence, and I think that's something that's, where is that talked about in our society? It's just never talked about, and it's something that, I think it's so powerful and could be so helpful at this point because, yeah, we should feel, reverence for this incredible situation we're in, this incredible planet, incredible animals and people and everything else. And Steiner and Gurdjieff both talk about this idea that, so in the scientific worldview, somebody can develop a massive amount of knowledge, but their personality, their psychology can be kind of underdeveloped. But that's not the case when it comes to developing into the supersensible realms. You have to develop your level of being to reach a different level of knowing, in various ways. To approach the supersensible world in a healthy way requires inner strength, patience, calmness, as I said, reverence, devotion, humility. Our reasoning must be perfectly lucid, even sober at all times. And the natural sciences, help us actually to provide a model for how to, really use observation techniques to check our perceptions, to, even though we're now talking about an area of inner development, and that's feels very subjective, you can still take those types of methods. This making sense so far? This making sense? Okay, good. Steiner talked about also as a result of initiation, these areas of cognition, the right word, thinking, feeling, and willing would become more independent. Where most people are, what you're totally seeing in the confusion in the world right now, is their thinking, their feeling, and their willing are all mixed up, right? They feel something, so they think it, so they will it. They don't understand how to separate these things properly. And really, it's a goal of evolution and initiation to fully separate thinking, feeling, and willing. And according to Steiner, actually, the beehive is a model that was given to us. He talks about the bees in the beehive are a gift from the beings on the planet of Venus to humanity. And apparently, the beehive is roughly the same size and shape as the human head, and also has pretty much the same temperature inside of it. But there you have this perfect differentiation of function. You have worker, queen, and drone. And so the idea in our development, we want to reach a point where our thinking, willing, and feeling are as perfectly distinct as the functions of the bees in the beehive. And as I mentioned, Steiner said that one of the goals, and obviously there's a lot more to study on this, and the two books that are good entry points are How to Know Higher Worlds and The Outline of Esoteric Science, to really understand Steiner's perspective on initiation and the process and so on. But one of the ultimate goals of initiation is to achieve continuity of consciousness between these three states of consciousness: waking state, dream state, and dreamless sleep. And eventually you reach a point of lucid dreaming, lucidity in dream, consciousness in dream, and even consciousness in dreamless sleep. And at that point, you're actually able to differentiate and commune directly with beings from the spiritual realms. And actually, this is like something that I've now encountered over and over again in different esoteric traditions. And I mentioned Evola. If you look at Sergio Magana, who's in Nahuatl, he's an Aztec shaman. He wrote a book called Age of the Sixth Sun. And he similarly says that their whole practice is about lucid dreaming, becoming awake in the dream world. And similarly, if you look at the Tibetan yoga of dream and sleep, it's a major practice of Tibetan Buddhism that until recently was a hidden practice. They didn't talk about it, but now they're talking about it. That's a really excellent book. And essentially, in that same Tibetan yoga of dream and sleep, he says the same thing, that there's the potential to become lucid in dream sleep, and then also to become conscious in dreamless sleep, which is considered to be like the ultimate level of consciousness. And I think there are some psychedelics that give you access temporarily to these levels of consciousness, but once again, they kind of shortcut, because you're not doing it through this painstaking process of meditation, contemplation, reflection, and so on. So I think, like, for instance, 5-MeO-DMT, which introduces you to like a nirvana, a void, non-dual reality, is like that dreamless sleep state if you were to experience it consciously. So I mentioned Steiner's first book, Philosophy of Freedom, his dissertation. And in that book, Steiner refutes Kantian dualism. And he talks about how, Kant's idea that we can separate the noumena from the phenomena, thoughts from things, it's just another idea, it's just another thought, doesn't really have an intrinsic reality to it. And instead of Kantian dualism, Steiner proposes monistic idealism. It's interesting, Amit Goswami uses that same term in his book, Physics of the Soul, I think. And Steiner points out that thinking is just like anything else, it's a part of the world. And he talks about how doesn't the world bring forth thinking in human heads with the same necessity that brings forth blossoms on the plants. He talks about how thinking is a unique capacity for human beings. And, he really writes his books, like How to Know Higher Worlds and Esoteric Science, in a way to guide your thinking, to really help you think along with him. And it's something that I actually think that I was also trying to do in my work, like in breaking it in the head. Like, I think if you can fully enter somebody else's thought It's incredible that you have that kind of access. And the reason that, I think, books in particular are the way to do that is they give us that capacity to unite our kind of individual perspective with somebody else's individual perspective. Steiner says, thinking is something that unites us, while feeling separates us. When we feel, we're in our individual being. We think, we kind of think with the world, or think with society, or think in a more capacious way. Steiner says, in thinking, we have that element. Oops, I can't do this. In thinking, we have that element that unites our separate individualities to one whole with the cosmos. And so far as we sense and feel, we are single beings. And so far as we think, we are the all one being that pervades everything. So for him, thinking really has a particularly high place and a high function. I find this to be really, personally, very, very satisfying, because I feel that a lot of the contemporary spiritual movement is kind of like, doesn't really respect thinking that much. It's all about feeling or devotion or being in your heart or whatever. And I think we need to integrate our cognitive capacities in a more disciplined way into this evolutionary process. So based on monistic idealism and his understanding, then Steiner goes on to sort of talk about how, the sort of role of thinking, or from a philosophical standpoint, is that you can reconcile the percepts, the things that you encounter in the world, the sense data, and your concepts. And you can do that, because it's a participatory universe. You have that ability to do that. And that all real philosophers have been artists in the realm of concepts. So I think for me, that's like something really significant in terms of understanding how far he goes when he gets more esoteric. He's extending the kind of capacities between the percept and the concept, and he opens them up like these accordions. It's quite amazing, actually. As I mentioned, Steiner says that we currently have 4 bodies. We have the physical body, the etheric body, or the life body, the astral body, and the I, or ego. The physical body is pretty obvious. So the physical body, each of these bodies has kind of evolved in these different planetary incarnations. So the sun, which was the initial phase, basically all that humans were the beginnings of the physical body, without really consciousness of any sort. Saturn, maybe we began to have like a consciousness of like the minerals or something. The moon, we began to maybe like a dream sleep consciousness. And then Earth is the first time we've gotten the I, or the ego, which Steiner talks about as another body. And Steiner said there's going to be future incarnations of the Earth, which he gave the names to. He calls the next one the Jupiter stage. This will also be part of our evolution, our evolution towards, I guess, in a sense, higher states of being and consciousness. I mean, the ether body is kind of like, maintains the life force in a way. When we go to sleep at night, according to Steiner, the physical body and the etheric body stay behind, on the bed or wherever you happen to sleep, the hammock. And the astral body and the I, or the ego, unite and take off together. And they go to explore the astral worlds. And that comes back in the form of the dreams that we get, which, when we're not initiated, tend to be kind of disorganized, disorderly. But as we begin to evolve and initiate ourselves, become more and more coherent and more connected to these other realms of being. So essentially, at this point, the Earth phase is when we've developed the I, or the ego, but it's still, we still have a ways to go. And what's essentially happens to us in this phase is, all these spiritual beings, demonic ones, good ones, horrible ones, beautiful ones, in the astral realm, a lot of them crave a sense world experience. So through us, this craving from the astral world is pouring in, and that often leads us to, addictions, depressions, compulsive behavior, destructive behavior, and so on. But what we can learn how to do in this phase of our evolution is to consciously intermediate and transform the astral body. And as we do that, as we master the astral realms, the energies that are trying to pour into us through the astral realms, we begin to construct what Steiner talks about as a new body, which he talks about as the spirit self. And in these successive phases of the evolution of humanity and the Earth, Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan, first it's the transformation of the astral body, then it's the conscious transformation of the etheric body, and finally it's the conscious transformation of the physical body, where we become fully like a spirit human. And I think, my understanding is somewhere along that trajectory, we shed the physical body. And the physical body has actually reached, according to Steiner, its perfection in this stage of evolution. And in fact, we can see that the physical body is completely permeated with wisdom and how it's constructed. I think at some point in one of these future evolutions, I'm not sure if the Jupiter phase or after, we actually give up the physical body and enter more into the spiritual realms ourselves. So yeah, the spirit self, the fifth body. I think I had in the last phase, yeah. There's other words for the manas, the buddhi, and the atman. The spirit self is the fifth body that we're gaining right now. And this is like, knowingly or not, this is what all of humanity is engaged with at this stage in our evolution, is developing the spirit self, this fifth body. So yeah, and Steiner says, I can't find a way to get rid of this one. The spirit self constitutes a higher aspect of our human makeup, one that is present in embryonic form, as it were, and emerges more and more in the course of working on ourselves. So that is like part of the goal of what's happening right now. And I mentioned before these development of these kind of higher aspects of human cognition, imagination, inspiration, intuition, how through our initiatory process, observation, contemplation, reflection, study. He has a whole technique of meditations and so on. Self-observation. We can begin to, sort of hone these faculties, imagination, inspiration, intuition. And then I just had some quotes, not from Steiner, but some other quotes that I thought helped sort of clarify what these might, how we might understand that. The imagination, Terence McKenna talks about how the human imagination is the holographic organ of the human body. We don't imagine anything. We simply see things that are so far away, there's no possibility of validating their existence. Amicus Swami talks about acting in our conditioned modality. That when we're acting in our conditioning, thoughts seem algorithmic, continuous, like Newtonian objects. Then we encounter creative thought, discontinuous, new thinking, a shift of meaning from the conditioned to unconditioned. Inspiration, the physicist F. David Pete talks about, inspiration is something like epiphanies, synchronicities, peak experiences, just these kind of incredible openings that happen that reveal the mind operating for moments, in its actual proper dimension, reaching past the source of mind and matter into the essence. And I mentioned before, so as I said, Steiner is a esoteric Christian. The picture on the bottom right is actually a statue that Steiner made. He was also an artist and an architect. That's a statue that Steiner was making of Ahriman, and how we imagined Ahriman. So Steiner saw this kind of triad, this not the devil and God, but Lucifer and Ahriman and humanity. So that Lucifer, in many ways, is a good, necessary, and positive force. Steiner talked about, the word Lucifer literally means light bringer, and Steiner had a magazine called Lucifer Gnosis, So that shows you that, he saw the importance of Lucifer. But Lucifer also is the rebellion, rebellion against authority, against divinity, against Godhead. Lucifer wants to set up its domain of freedom and beauty and genius, visionary flights. Essentially, when you have a great genius, the word genius comes from the word genie, and the idea of like the genie in the bottle, the sort of spiritual being that you can get wishes from. And similarly, in like ancient Greece, men would have a little altar in their house to their personal daimon. They thought that their creativity, their inspiration, wasn't something that was just coming from them, that actually had to do with their alliance with their daimon, that being outside of themselves, a spiritual being. So these were examples of kind of the Luciferic. Like essentially for Steiner, when you see somebody get possessed by genius in our society, like Rimbaud or Bob Dylan or something, it's like they've actually made an alliance with the Luciferic being. The Luciferic beings took a different evolutionary path than humanity through a different set of world cycles. And they've reached a point in their evolution where they're too advanced to have a physical body for themselves, but they actually can only develop themselves through a human body. So they have to do that by making an alliance with the human being. And I think like, I find like, for instance, the Burning Man festival, a very Luciferic phenomenon. And psychedelics are often very Luciferic, actually, LSD or something. So Lucifer has a lot of good qualities, genius and beauty and liberty and freedom, but it also is pulling us away from the earthly realm, away from responsibility and so on. Then the other force that's working on us all the time is the Ahrimanic. So Ahriman comes from the Zoroastrian faith. It was like the sort of evil earth spirit. And Ahriman, where Steiner is pulling us up and away, Ahriman is pulling us down and in, kind of into the earth, into the material realm, into technology. And for Steiner, it's like the spirit of materialism, materialist technologies, and sterility in a sense. And it seeks domination, dominion. It seeks control of humanity. And Steiner felt that Christ was actually modeling the way that we have to walk the sort of tightrope between the Luciferic and Ahrimanic energies and forces. But Steiner also realized that this period, with the domination, with the dominance of materialist philosophy and science, was kind of the ascendancy of Ahriman. And Steiner actually believed that Ahriman was going to incarnate, I'm pretty sure he said in the 21st century, so in the century that we're now in. This was back in the, writing back in the 20s. We're moving towards an event called the Incarnation of Ahriman. And Steiner says that this is inevitable and it's going to happen soon, and we have to sort of prepare ourselves for it. So what is this? From my perspective, it could be the technological singularity. It could be the release of generalized AI, a kind of, machine consciousness, a mechanical consciousness that, has aims and purposes that are just very different than what we have as humans. And the way that we have to prepare for it, according to Steiner, is, basically the type of knowledge that he's putting out into the world, get more people to understand that this materialist world conception is kind of an illusion. It's a kind of Maya. And behind the workings of the physical world, there's actually spiritual beings. And then have people develop a relationship with that. That's actually necessary. I was talking about, I'm not going to go into all the different beings that Steiner talks about kind of behind the physical world, but I love this book, Man, a Symphony of the Creative Word. It's a beautiful book where he talks about the elemental beings. He talks about the gnomes and the goblins and the naiads and the undines, spirits that live in the elements like water and earth and fire. He talks about how the gnomes are these types of beings who have, they're tremendously intelligent, and they move under the earth, and they actually take in the cosmic wisdom that the stars beam into the plants. And then the wisdom goes down to the roots of the plants, and they grab up this cosmic wisdom, and then they push the plants up into the sky. So the gnomes are pushing away at the plants, pushing them up into the sky. And the gnomes, apparently, though, they have to keep moving if they stop even for a moment, they turn into toads or amphibians. So they have a total fear of becoming toads or amphibians. I mean, it's just crazy stuff like that. There's so many things in Steiner where I read it and I'm like, is he kidding? Like, what is he talking about? But then, the more that I sit with it, it just finds like an interesting kind of place in my soul that the stuff that he talks about kind of resonates on some orthogonal level to anything else that I've understood or thought about. And I don't know. I mean, I feel that he has knowledge, of something that in a way of expressing that is so unique and poetic in a way. So in this, Mad Symphony of the Creative Word, he talked about birds, butterflies, and bats. So yeah, so we're, anthroposophy. So humans are at the center of this evolutionary journey. In a sense, the earth is a staging ground for our evolutionary journey. And behind the physical manifestations, there's spiritual powers who have sort of formed, things in a way. And so he talks about how the beings of the air actually represent kind of our thought processes, our different cognitive processes, let's say, for capacities. So birds for Steiner represent cosmic thought, like the way a bird flies through the air is kind of like the direction of a thought. And you can think about how, maybe somebody, thinks like an eagle, somebody else maybe thinks like a pigeon or a sparrow or something. So somehow birds represent the thought worlds. For Steiner, butterflies represent cosmic memory. I mean, the way the butterfly, begins in this cocoon and then opens up from the chrysalis. Steiner connects that to the process of memory. And then bats for Steiner represent cosmic dream. The way the bat flits through the air is like the way the dream flits through the mind. It's so hard to hold on to it. It just vanishes in a second. And this is just a paragraph from that book, just to give you a sense of how he talks about this stuff. The butterfly continually imparts spiritualized matter to the cosmos. The bird is the flying thought, but the bat is the flying dream picture of the cosmos. So we can say, the earth is surrounded by a web of butterflies, this is cosmic memory, and by the kingdom of the birds, this is cosmic thinking, and by the bats, they are the cosmic dreaming. It's actually the flying dreams of the cosmos which soar through space as the bats. I just love it. I mean, it's nothing. It's like nothing else that you can find. I also really recommend his series of books called Karmic Relationships, where he explains his esoteric understanding of how reincarnation happens and how these kind of beings in the spirit realm kind of, he takes us through the process of the life, between, death and rebirth. He does that in Outline of Esoteric Science. But then he talks about these other beings, sometimes somebody's ether body has to be, kind of duplicated. And suddenly like many people will have that person's etheric body. Or, he follows somebody like Friedrich Engels and shows who that person was in a past life and the life before that, and kind of gives you a sense of, what that trajectory was. So it's basically very much like, Tibetan Buddhism, where they have these lamas who, they know to expect because they have the science of reincarnation. They know the Dalai Lama by the tools that, they show the child, how he reacts to them and so on. So Steiner basically says that this is also happening in the West. We've just lost the knowledge. And Steiner says that actually it's pretty self-evident that reincarnation is reality. If we even just think about, how when a child, the essence of that personality is there right away. It's not at all like a blank slate. It's like we come into the world with soul qualities, with characteristics, with dispositions. And as Steiner says, all the dispositions of character which we bring with us in this life are the fruit of experiences gained during earlier lives on Earth. Karmic relationships, it follows different Western individualities to past lives. I mean, he also has just, once again, these crazy things where he talks about like somebody who has bad skin in this life, a lot of acne or some skin condition. It might be because they weren't that interested in people in like a past life. They were more self-interested. If somebody has hair and fingernails that grow really quickly, it might be because they were very interested in other people in past life and vivacious and so on. He says that you often, when you have in your new life, in the first third of your life, you'll often meet people that you were with in the last third of a previous life. And then vice versa. Towards the last third, you'll meet people that you knew in the first third. And that as soon as you meet people for the first time in the new life, the past karma is dispelled and you're starting again from scratch. What was that movie, that Jupiter Rising, I think it was called? Was that the Wachowski sisters made a movie that was all about reincarnation, following these different characters through the past and the future. It really resonated with Steiner's way of thinking about this stuff. And Steiner said, to supersensible perception, there is no such thing as unconsciousness, only various degrees of consciousness. Everything in the world is conscious. And also, in a sense, everything is evolving in a certain respect, or devolving. I mean, Steiner also talks about how when you have these world incarnations, you'll have many beings who aren't ready to make a positive evolutionary leap to this next level of consciousness, and they'll have to take a different pathway. Like he talks about, when we go to the fifth world or the Jupiter state, there'll be a lot of humans who maybe aren't ready to evolve in that way, and they'll be put on a, they'll be part of a moon, like a deviant moon, and then for quite a long time, the humans who are on the sort of Jupiter path will be still trying to bring the humans who are on the sort of deviant moon back into the fold, in a sense. Anyway, he goes into that in great depth, and he also talks about how basically, everything is evolving in consciousness, like minerals, which basically have a very, low state of consciousness now, will be kind of at the state of dreamless sleep in the Jupiter stage. Plants, which are currently at their dreamless sleep consciousness, will be in a dream consciousness state. He also says in the Jupiter stage, we won't have animals anymore. They'll disappear. Which I do find interesting, when we look at the world and how fast extinctions are happening and so on. It does almost feel like we're kind of creating the conditions for a world that doesn't really allow for animals in a way. I can't even read. The last thing was, and we developed the spirit self, the transformation of the astral body, the conscious, kind of capacity to master the astral forces. And Steiner said that our incarnations don't go on for eternity. They began at a certain point in time, and at some point they will cease. The human being will then continue his development in a different form. So it's a different idea than Buddhism, which just has these endless cycles. For Steiner, there's like a spiral, there's a purpose, there's a telos, and humanity is ultimately, one of the spiritual hierarchies. Like the Luciferic beings or the angelic beings, we have a role in this evolving consciousness, and that's really what the mission of his work is, to express that. Just a shout out to Amit Goswami. These two books, I think, are very interesting in relationship to Steiner's work. They begin to provide kind of a scientific backing for Steiner. Physics of the Soul and the Self-Aware Universe. And essentially, Goswami looks at how quantum physics really allows us to begin to think about how you could have something like reincarnation. Like, since we now know that you can have like action at distance, non-locality, let's say that our thinking and feeling and willing create kind of aggregates, and after we die, those aggregate, the sort of, let's say, quantum, material somehow maintain connected. And they want to then, if there's a sense that the journey is not complete, they'll be called back into, those aggregates will be called back into taking a new body and trying again. Why are we here? So for Steiner, he actually has some nice answers to that, which I think it's helpful to hear that. One purpose of human existence is to transform the earth. We are transforming the earth. The earth is extremely different than it was, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago. We're actually transforming the earth at a very fast rate at this point. According to Steiner, we don't only transform the earth when we're here physically, we're also involved in those forces of transformation when we're in the spirit, when we're in between lives. And according to Steiner, we tend to come back to Earth to reincarnate again when the Earth has transformed significantly. So it might be that we have 2 incarnations, male and female, over 2,000 years. So we come back to the Earth and we find it in a very different condition. The ultimate mission of humanity is to transform what we've already inherited as the cosmos of wisdom into a cosmos of love. And yeah, I mean, it's like when you think about the perfection of the physical body, the perfection of the, the incredible, Earth, solar system, everything that we've just been given, through, as we evolve further, our role will be to transform the cosmos of wisdom into a cosmos of love. And eventually also, we give back to the Earth, according to Steiner, in a future evolutionary cycle. Everything that we've taken from the Earth, everything the Earth that is given to us, we also then give it back. And then, as I mentioned, humanity is also, although we're now in this more physicalized form, on another level, we're also a spiritual hierarchy, and we have our proper place and role in this evolving cosmos. Okay, guys, so I've taken you through my little PowerPoint presentation now. Maybe some questions would be good. I can, there's so many avenues with Steiner, I didn't really go into. I'm not really an expert on biodynamic farming or Waldorf schools or educational philosophy. What's always really turned me on is this incredible esoteric vision that he has. I don't know, but we can talk about anything. So throw up some questions, raise your hands, and I'm going to stop sharing. So I'm going to leave it for that today for you guys. And thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed this, and I really appreciated the level, the quality of the, listening and the resonance of the interactions. And, and I look forward to doing another one of these in a couple of weeks. I just got to figure out on what exactly. And, feel free to message me with takeaways. We'll put this up as an archived video, and Claudia and I will discuss the study group idea, and look forward to more. So thank you so much.